This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 400, Chat with Dries. 400 episodes is a big milestone for us. With episode 000 on May 30th, 2013, this is also our 10th anniversary. 10 years of sharing our love for Drupal. It's been easy because Drupal continues to evolve and the community is always sharing. Our monthly guest hosts, weekly guests, endless topics, and contrib modules to discuss have made this easy. Talking Drupal is only a reflection of the Drupal community that supports it. A special thanks to all our guest hosts and guests that have helped us provide content over the years, and to our patrons who continue to support us. We truly appreciate you. This would not have been possible without the support of our loved ones. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we celebrate our 400th episode with a very special guest. As you may have guessed from the title, today we are talking with Dries Buytaert.
Perfect.
Dries is founder and project lead of Drupal and the co-founder and CTO of Acquia. Welcome back to the show, and thank you for joining us to celebrate the 400th.
Thanks for having me. And first of all, congratulations on this huge milestone. It's been pretty amazing to hear you guys hit episode 400 and that you've been doing this for so long. So congratulations, and a big thank you as well. That's a big contribution to the Drupal project. So
thank you. Appreciate it. I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-hosts are, as usual, John Picozzi, solution architect at EPAM.
Hey, everyone. Happy 400th.
Also joining us for this special milestone, Stephen Cross, founder and happy contributor to Talking Drupal. Welcome back.
Hey, glad to be here again. Thanks, guys.
And joining us for the whole show, our newest Talking Drupal member, Martin Anderson-Klutz, Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick. Great to be here.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin, who is the maintainer of a growing number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. This week, I thought we would talk about OpenAI, which provides a suite of modules and an API foundation for OpenAI integration for generating text, content, images, content analysis, and more. The module is quite new. It was actually just created in January of 2023, and the current version is a 1.0.0 Alpha 8, which actually requires Drupal 10. So if you've been putting off upgrading to Drupal 10, here's a great reason to do so. Now, the module is very actively maintained, and there's lots of great discussion and activity, both in its issue queue and in the OpenAI Drupal Slack channel. It currently has 34 open issues, 6 of which are bugs, and the module is currently in use by 149 websites. It was created by Kevin Quillen of Valier, who also himself maintains a healthy list of modules. Now, the module works by integrating Drupal with APIs available from OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. It allows content authors to leverage AI to enhance their content in a variety of ways. So generating text using a ChatGPT-like query, summarizing existing text, changing its sentiment, suggesting taxonomy terms, and more. There are a number of ways you can make these capabilities available within your Drupal website. So you can put it into the WYSIWYG toolbar as a button, as additional sidebar controls in the entity form, and also as a dedicated administrative interface. There are also granular controls over how the AI will be used. So which AI model you want it to use, how much randomness to introduce, and so on. And there's even Devel integrations so that instead of generating content that looks like lorem ipsum, it can actually bear some resemblance to the content of the site that you're actually developing. Now, this is a module that I personally started playing with about 6 weeks ago, and even in that short time, I've seen some pretty significant evolution. So I would say that it already offers a robustness and range of capabilities that I think is pretty exceptional for a module that's so new. And there are a number of additional capabilities that are currently planned. So let's talk about the OpenAI module.
Yeah, I think this is super cool. I think one of the things that really stood out to me is the summarize option. So having that like little snippet for a teaser for a piece of content is, for me, is one of the hardest things to pull together. So having something that can kind of give you an idea of what you should put there, I think is super helpful.
I was just going to say, I feel like we've probably all worked on projects where at the start you devote this ambitious content architecture where you're going to have, summaries and tags and all these things. And then once it gets into the hands of editors, they just want to copy and paste in the content, attach the images and move on to other tasks that they have. And so I think the promise of AI to potentially, generate those summaries, do some of the tagging to make that process easier, but also fulfill that original vision for the site, I think is pretty compelling.
Yeah.
With the excitement of ChatGPT and the API, I'm a little surprised that number is at 149. I wonder if something has to do with the paywall that is with the API. So when you create an API key for ChatGPT, you have a threshold of number of free queries you have for them, and you have to start to pay at some point. Do you have any sense of that, Martin?
I mean, definitely the fact that it requires payment is probably, a little bit of a disincentive. I think also it being so new, there may not be as many people just aware that the capability exists. And then also, anytime you have something that is in sort of that alpha state, which I think even the alpha release is quite new, there's a bit of a disincentive in terms of people obviously aren't going to want to use it on production sites. So probably a combination of factors, but again, seeing the momentum that it has right now, I would expect that number to grow pretty quickly.
I would agree with that. Actually, I was going to say the exact same thing as Martin. I've been following the module or set of modules since its inception. It's quite impressive how fast it's kind of being expanded upon. But obviously, it's still tagged alpha, which I do think makes a lot of people reluctant to actually try it. So at some point, hopefully, we'll get to beta and sort of a GA release as well, and I would expect that number to go up quite a bit.
Yeah,
Right.
and I was going to take the opposite tactic. I mean, 149 sites in 5 months is, I feel like the threshold to get to 100 sites is a lot longer than people might think. I'd be interested to see how quickly other modules get adopted in the past. I think 150 in a few months means a lot of people are really interested in playing with it, at least.
It'll be interesting. We're actually having Kevin on the show in a couple of weeks to talk about his new book with Matt Glauman. So we can ask him about it when he comes on. I was actually also thinking, as Martin was talking, Stephen and I at the beginning of this year had kind of talked about blogging on our personal blogs more, and I feel like this could be used to help facilitate that endeavor, because I'm admittedly lagging behind. So,
well, thank you, Martin. Another great module choice for Module of the Week. So let's move on to our primary topic. So let's start with, since this is kind of a milestone episode and we're kind of looking back over 10 years of the show, we can use that opportunity to kind of do the same thing for the Drupal project. So if we're looking back 10 years ago, Drupal 7 had been out for a couple of years. Drupal 8 was being talked about. What do you think is the biggest improvement or your favorite improvement to Drupal in the last decade?
So my personal favorite, I think I'm going to go with Claro. And Claro is, if you don't know, it's Drupal's new backend theme. And
Yep.
I picked that because it's so visible to me, every time I go to my own site and do some writing or content editing or whatever it is, I see it. And every time I enjoy using it. So for me, it's been awesome, I kind of enjoy using my site more because of it. And I imagine that is true for other people as well. So that would be my favorite. Now, there's obviously a lot of great innovations that have happened over the last 10 years. A lot of exciting things too, but I don't know. Claro is what came to mind when you asked me the question. So
That's a good one.
I'm curious about your second and third then.
Oh, these are also good questions. I think maybe counterintuitively, I'm going to say Composer is one of them. And that's a bit counterintuitive because Obviously, it also introduced some complexity and grumblings in the Drupal project as well. But I think you combine that with what we're doing around Project Browser and automatic updates, and I actually think we'll come out ahead of where we were 10 years ago. So I think of Composer as a really key building block for the future of Drupal. And I think with Project Browser and automatic updates, we're going to be able to eliminate a lot of the kind of extra complexities. But so I think that's pretty profound improvement that we've made in the last 10 years. It's been a long journey, but I think we're getting close to getting Project Browser and automatic updates over the finish line. So,
yeah.
So focusing more on kind of on the future, right? And you know, moving to the coming years, right? Wondering what you see as the biggest opportunities and challenges facing Drupal, you know, coming down the pipe, and if there are any plans to address any of them.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenges for me, in my mind, are we have to continue to make Drupal easier to evaluate and adopt. It's still not always easy, even though we've made some great progress. I think we need to continue to make Drupal easier for site builders, specifically sort of the ambitious site builders. I think reducing total cost of ownership is also a key thing. I do talk to organizations that may have one or more Drupal sites, and updating these sites can be time consuming, especially because there's frequent updates. And then I think another thing that we need to focus on is actually promoting Drupal. I think we have a lot of great things happening in Drupal, and we don't always kind of shout out of the rooftop, so to speak. Now we are working on a lot of these things, obviously, or all of these things, I should say. Our plans for Drupal 11, which is what we're working on right now, is really focused on empowering these ambitious site builders. It's really focused on making it easier to evaluate and adopt Drupal, and also reducing the cost of ownership. So I think we're focused on the right things. And I feel pretty good about where we're going, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest, the biggest thing for me in the last, the from 8 to 9 now to 10 up to, going into the future is like the pretty reliable upgrade path and not needing to kind of do a rebuild, right? So, there are still there's still a lot of sites on Drupal 7, right? But I think once we get those sites to, Drupal 9, Drupal 10, like what you're talking about, the reduction in cost and the the way we think about Drupal is going to change quite a bit, right? For me, at least, I'm looking at it as like, now that there's a stable upgrade path and a release schedule, right? We can now focus on like using Drupal like as a platform, and then, adding features, adding functionality to help organizations. So I think like that's part of what, that kind of that communication feels like needs to happen to me, like more of the like, hey, here's what's coming or what's here, and how you can capitalize on it in the future.
Yeah, and it's really there right now. I was recently talking to Pac-12, actually, which is college football company or organization. I'm not sure what to call it. I forgot the exact numbers, so don't quote me on the exact numbers, but they talked to me about how they upgraded from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, and it took a team of, I forgot what it was, but let's call it 5 people, 3 months or something, because it's a very complex website and they do some pretty amazing things. I'm not sure if you know about like even the tickers that you see on TV, the content that scrolls at the bottom of the TV during football games, that is all powered by Drupal. They do their schedules and programming guides, all powered by Drupal. And you can imagine, it's not just a simple Drupal site. It's actually kind of the backbone of their whole operations. Quite impressive. So it was a big effort to upgrade from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. And recently they were telling me how they upgraded to the latest version of Drupal, and they said it took one intern, like a week or so, to upgrade the whole platform that they built, complex platform that they built from, to the latest version of Drupal. So that's pretty strong testament of how dramatically the upgrade path changed. And I think that changes everything because it allows you to really, as you said, John, like use Drupal as a platform. You can build on it and you can kind of sleep well at night knowing that you're going to be able to run on that for many, many, many years to come with a relatively easy upgrade path.
One of the corollaries of that is the Drupal rector and update process too. Like getting that to the contrib project so that they can update too is even 9 to 10. Like people are looking at that, looking for them, and updating so much more rapidly. It's so much nicer. That's been a great improvement.
Very true.
Could we get that intern's name, by the way?
You have a site upgrade?
So DrupalCon, like the staple of the conference every year for Drupal, like a key point in that conference is always the Dries note. It's the point that you get to share your vision for the future for Drupal. So back in DrupalCon Portland, you talked about the ambitious site builders, and I'm interested to know a year later now how that has come about and how you think that's like grown, and maybe talk a little bit about that concept of the ambitious site builder.
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. There's a few things to unpack probably, but like maybe I'll start by kind of explaining what an ambitious site builder is, at least in my mind. But it's essentially a site builder, that kind of sits between, let's say, a developer that's kind of hand coding everything using a framework, right? As well as sort of a content author that's maybe using like a SaaS solution that's completely WYSIWYG, no code, where you can actually create custom code at all. And so in my mind, an ambitious site builder is a person that does most things through the UI, but can also write some custom code when necessary. And maybe not the most advanced code, but it's kind of this hybrid role. And I think it's perfect for Drupal, because there's clearly, in my mind, a gap between sort of framework developers and content authors. And historically, Drupal has fit that really well. And that's how many people actually got involved with Drupal. So that is what I think of as an ambitious site builder. It's kind of a special flavor of a site builder. Now, maybe we're talking a little bit more about the word ambitious and where that came from and how we got to this point. But about 6 years ago, I think, I actually declared in one of the Dries notes, a previous Dries note, that Drupal is for ambitious digital experiences. You may remember this. But at the time, it was a bit contentious, I would say, because a lot of people actually didn't like the term digital experiences. And some people might still not like it. But I would say overall, the whole world has adopted that term, digital experiences. We kind of moved from websites to digital experiences. So I think the term has become the norm in our industry. And obviously, you can tell, like, we kind of evolved that statement, right? From Drupal is for ambitious digital experiences, we went to Drupal is for ambitious, site builders. That's a kind of a shift that I introduced at the, at one of the most recent Dries notes. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, I would argue that we kind of achieved that vision of Drupal is for ambitious digital experiences. Since I had declared that as kind of where we needed to go, we invested a lot in headless. We did things like the media, module. We did layout builder in core. Lots of other additional capabilities that enable kind of ambitious digital experiences to be built. Maybe kind of a quick side note on the term ambitious too.
Sure.
Because when people think about Drupal, they typically think about powerful and flexible And I felt ambitious was a great word because it aligns with that flexibility, scalability, speed, creative freedom, and many Drupal sites are ambitious. You think about the website for the Olympics, largest digital event in the history of the web. It's built on Drupal. That's pretty ambitious. Wow. You think about Fortune 2000 companies that have thousands of websites on Drupal. That's also ambitious. But you think about startups and universities using Drupal in very ambitious ways. And so I felt it a really good word for Drupal. And also specifically wanted to avoid the word enterprise, because I don't love that word. And I think it's too narrow of a definition, because enterprise, in my mind, means large corporations. But we have so many nonprofits, we have so many schools and universities using Drupal, we have government organizations, like all these things. They're also ambitious, but they're not necessarily enterprises. Anyway, so that's why I liked ambitious. It captures what Drupal is about. It captures what people do with Drupal, and it's not kind of just enterprise. Enterprise is a part of that. So that's why we shifted. And
I have a question about the word enterprise.
Yeah.
So back when Drupal 8 launched, it felt like the word enterprise was used a lot, and it felt like it came to a negative connotation with Drupal. Do you feel like did that word enterprise come from Drupal itself, or did that really just come from the community?
I think it came from the community. I've always been mindful of not using it, to be honest. I may have used it. I'm not saying I never used it, but if you were to go to my blog, I think you would find relatively few kind of statements that say, or probably zero statements that say Drupal is for the enterprise, because I've always, as I said, I think it's more than the enterprise. And I think we have so many important stakeholders that wouldn't identify with being enterprise organizations,
Drupal is like so much more than enterprise, right? So it's for, EDUs, education, it's for government. It's, at least in my opinion, it's for anybody that wants to have, a robust CMS. And I'm going to geek out or become a total fanboy for a few minutes here, because I was at the Dries Note in Portland, and like when you use the term ambitious site builder, this is actually my question, but like when you use that term, I was like, holy bleepity bleep, that's me.
Yeah.
Like, I as a solutions architect, I sit somewhere between like the dev team and the client to like try to figure out what the solution is for them, right? And I came up as a Drupal engineer, and I know enough code to be dangerous is what I usually tell people, right? But like, my stance has always been, and probably will forever be, like with enough money and time, we can build anything. And like Drupal lends itself to being, going back to our previous question, a great starting point base for that, right?
Yeah.
And when you use the term ambitious site builder, like in my head, like the wheels just start turning, right? Because like there are things, as we just talked about, that like Drupal is positioning itself to be very good at, which is content management, content layout, talking to other systems. We just had a great example with Pac-12. Like they're using that to power a banner at the bottom of your TV, right? So like, I was very excited personally to hear that term and like be able to like, I definitely gravitated towards it. But, I think going back to, what Stephen was talking about, I do think enterprise gets a little bit of a negative spin sometimes. And, I think Drupal is a great enterprise system, but I think it's also a great educational system or a great government system, and can be molded into something very custom if need be.
Yeah, I love what you said, and because that was actually my hope. And maybe it's a nice side story, but I was at a conference a while back. It was a relatively small conference, and we had the privilege of Satya Nadella being kind of the keynote speaker. Satya Nadella is a CEO of Microsoft. If you're not familiar with him, and it was kind of a Q&A on stage. And one of the interviewer asked a question like, so, like Steve Ballmer left and, Satya Nadella stepped into his shoes, and all of a sudden it feels like Microsoft started to flourish, and so the first question was like, what did you do? How did you do that? Because obviously it's a very large company and you're just the CEO, so to speak. Like, how do you reinvigorate an organization as large as Microsoft? And the answer to that question really stuck with me and actually inspired me to shift sort of our kind of tagline, if you will. And anyway, what he said was he interviewed and talked to some of the longest tenured employees at Microsoft, and he learned that Microsoft was all about builders. He said we were born a company focused on the builders. Like people wanted to build applications on top of the original, DOS and on the original Microsoft platform, and was open. Everybody could build on top of it. And Satya Nadella then said, like, and that's what we decided to return to. I made that decision to kind of focus on the builder persona. And Microsoft, in a way, has lost his way a little bit and was getting into, I don't know, mobile phones and all that kind of stuff. And he basically declared to go back to the roots. And if you think about builders, it's why they bought GitHub, which is kind of the ultimate builder platform, right? It's why they invested so much in Azure, which is a cloud platform for builders. And all of these things just kind of reinvigorated Microsoft. And anyway, leaving that conference, I felt like, wow, what would that be for Drupal? And it really felt like what John just said, like I think it's that site builder and that ambitious site builder that is maybe not a like professionally trained developer. It could be, but not required to be a professional trained developer that can quickly assemble great experiences with Drupal. And if necessary, kind of add a little bit of custom code as well, to make it truly unique and ambitious. And so that's why I shifted from just ambitious digital experiences, which kind of was more focused on what you do with Drupal, to ambitious site builder is more like the person that actually does things. And to me, that felt like going back to our roots a little bit more, and it also felt more meaningful. It's nicer to focus on the person than on the thing. And it also subtly shifts our focus, right? If you're going to be focused on the user, you should focus on the user experience, not just on the capabilities of. And so anyway, I kind of liked it, and I think I think people like it. I think we should stick with it. Maybe one day we kind of shift again, but for now, I think there's a lot of work to be done to really focus on that persona. And if you think about our roadmap, and I know our roadmaps, but like project browser, automatic updates, these are all things that are great for these ambitious site builders.
It really takes us out of the like stigma of like Drupal being built by developers for developers, right? Like, and that's we're going on like, I don't know, that's 5 years old, 10 years old maybe at this point, who knows, but like really coming to something that I always and many of us I think do, like when we look at a project, we're like, okay, well, we can build this and we can custom code it, and like there are two aspects of that, right? Like there's the 80-20 rule of like, hey, I can use 80% of custom modules and 20% or 10% custom code to get the project over the line. But then there's also like, at the end of the day, the people that need to use this, how are they going to use this, right? And what's going to be the best use case for them? So like, I think that move makes a lot of sense to me. And I mean, I think it's the future. So it's great.
So Dries, we've mentioned DrupalCon a couple of times already, and DrupalCon Pittsburgh is coming up quickly. What's on tap for this year's Dries Note? Is there any spoilers you can share?
Sure. I mean, honestly, I'm a little bit behind on making slides, but as you may have read, I'm organizing like an innovation contest. So I really kind of figured out the theme of my keynote. I want to focus more on innovation and how we accelerate innovation, how we remove barriers to innovation, these kinds of things. And I figured it would be fitting to try and do something new and exciting and mix it up a little bit. I was also getting a little bit tired of kind of doing the same style of keynote every time. it's probably a lot of useful information for people, but I just wanted to do something a little different. And so, inspired by like Shark Tank, which you may know, it's like this show on TV where people can pitch ideas and they get, funding for their company. I wanted to do something similarly. Obviously, people aren't asking for funding for a company, but they're basically asking for a donation, for their idea to be sponsored. And so the idea is that everybody in the Drupal community can submit a short video, 2.5 minutes max, pitching their ideas, explaining why it's a great idea and why Drupal would benefit from this idea getting funding, and then also kind of explain how much funding you want. And by the way, everybody can participate. You don't have to attend Drupalcon. You can participate as an individual, as a team, as an agency. It doesn't matter. Like, we want to hear the best ideas that will help kind of move Drupal forward, and hopefully aligned with some of our strategic goals, like something that is focused on an ambitious site builder would be amazing, And the idea is that we would, grant them sort of a donation, like to go and implement their idea. And we have already secured $70,000 that we can give away on stage at Drupalcon, which is exciting. And we're hoping to raise some more money and maybe even allow people in the audience or at home to also chip in, And so we're trying to get some of the best, coolest, innovative ideas, most impactful ideas funded. And so that's not a secret, that's public, but I just wanted to promote it in the show. And hopefully people will submit their ideas,
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to seeing that contest and like what comes out of that. It looks pretty cool.
Yeah, me too.
It looks like fun too.
I have no idea. Like, hopefully it's fun and exciting, but it's it really will depend on the contributions and the submissions. So
absolutely. So moving on, I have a question about a recent blog post, and I know this is a topic that's pretty near and dear to Martin's heart as well. So he might have some insight too. But you wrote a blog post back in March about how content management systems can outperform static site generators. One of the things you hear all the time is static sites are great because they're faster. And you posted some comparisons exploring that topic. Is this something that you were thinking about because so many sites are moving to headless and moving to static site generators and trying to figure out where Drupal fits in that? Or is it just kind of something you were thinking about?
I mean, honestly, I was growing frustrated with some of the marketing language and kind of, I mean, that's an honest, transparent answer. Like, a lot of the Jamstack, marketing or static site generator marketing, they often refer to traditional CMSs like Drupal as a legacy system, and they would honestly then add on top of that some, let's call it questionable or naive marketing as well, like saying it's they're faster and all these kinds of things. And now, listen, I understand there's pros and cons to each kind of approach. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I felt like sometimes Drupal was miscategorized, and I was frustrated that we just let them say these things. And so I felt like, you know what, let me write a post that debunks some of these claims and that is maybe a little bit more intellectually honest. Like, I wasn't trying to pick a fight or anything. I was just trying to educate and provide an alternative viewpoint. So in that blog post specifically, I compared the performance of different sites with my site, which is obviously powered by Drupal. And guess what? My site was faster than all of the static sites that I benchmarked it against. And that just goes to the point that some of the marketing, it's like, well, not really, because, for the reasons that I explained in my blog post. Now, anyway, that's kind of why, Nick, it's a very transparent why. And, I would encourage people to do posts like that, and look at the pros and the cons of each approach and help educate people.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a common misconception, and I mean my site is a Drupal site, but I statically generate it using Tome. So I mean, if you're looking for statically generated content, you don't have to step outside of the Drupal world even.
That's right. That's the beauty of headless, right?
Yeah,
it allows you to. Well, with Drupal, you can do both. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can have a traditional site, you can have a headless site, you can power any number of static site generators. Like the Drupal Next.js project is a great example.
Yeah,
as an example.
That's
Tome is a great example. There's so many. Gatsby, you can use Drupal with Gatsby. All these things are just possible.
One interesting note is that I feel like anecdotally this week on social media, I've been seeing a lot of buzz about the positive aspects of a monolithic architecture. So a lot of people saying big organizations have actually been able to save a lot of money by moving away from serverless, which has sort of been the big buzzword for a number of years. And so now the pendulum is starting to swing back towards, that monolithic architecture, which I think is just.
I would agree with that. I think, I've been around for a while now. I've been doing this for 22 years. And like these things, it's like a pendulum. They swing back and forth. Things come out of style, into style again, out of style. And I see the benefits of microservices, but I never really felt like they're the best every single time. You know what I mean? Like they introduce a lot of complexity. There's a lot of overhead to microservices that sometimes is justified. But oftentimes, it's actually way more complex, and most organizations don't need it. So I think with anything, you just have to be pragmatic and maybe not kind of follow all the hype all the time,
I mean, I feel, and you can, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but like I often feel that the term monolith is like thrown around, right? And really, like sometimes in my head, I find that I just translate it to like bad architecture, right? Because it's like, sometimes it feels like a little bit of a land grab to me, where like a monolith was built so that a team or a company could retain control over every aspect of a system and platform, right? As opposed to saying like, hey, you know what, we can use something like Drupal or something else. Like, obviously I'm a Drupal fanboy, but like we can use Drupal and as a traffic cop to integrate with different systems and let those systems do what they do best, and then let Drupal do what it does best, and then possibly just pipe all that out to a headless front end or a headless, an in-car display or some other thing, right?
Well,
I've often referred to Drupal as like the traffic cop in your platform, right? And like people say, oh, monoliths are bad, and I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, yes, if it's like the monolith that's trying to do everything and you have to have a developer like jump in there and code something custom every time you want to integrate with something, yeah, that is not great.
But I'm not sure if Drupal is even a monolith, like, I'm not saying Drupal is a microservices architecture. I'm not saying that at all, but Drupal is so modular. You can swap out every component of it. It's a very flexible, modular, modern architecture, I would say. And it scales great, like, as I mentioned, like the website of the Olympics runs on Drupal, like some of the largest sites in the world. So like often you hear, it's a little bit like it's the static site generators. People will talk about how microservices-based architecture scale better. And it's like, well, they certainly scale, but so does Drupal, in its current architecture. So it's just two different ways of doing things. And again, each of these approaches has some pros and cons, but often these words are thrown around, traditional CMSs, monoliths, as being, there's like a negative connotation to it. And I don't think that is valid,
Yeah, I want to go on the record to clarify. I do not think Drupal is a monolith, but I think like in certain, RFP responses, sometimes people throw that word around and like, toss it in the Drupal direction.
I think the reality is just that scaling is hard. And sometimes people blame the architecture when they bump up against a limit that they can't get beyond, and they re-architect. and solve the problem that they were running into until they run into something else that's hard to solve again. And then they'll re-architect back to some other system that solves the problem that they're getting to.
That's right. I think it's well said. Yeah. Sometimes people just want to start fresh.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to. I mean, Drupal did Drupal 7 to 8.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain in that decision, but I think every so often it's important.
I think Drupal makes that scenario easier, Nick. In my opinion, again, coming from the point of a fanboy, right? But like, you know, when you have a organization that uses a lot of systems, it's far easier to pull a contrib module off the shelf to integrate with a system, and then enhance that module to do what you need it to do, right? Than some other proprietary sort of solutions. So, you know, I think you're spot on, but you know, I don't know. In my head, I'm like, Drupal solves everything. Yay.
Solves a lot.
So let's continue down the contributed modules thread, right? And this next question I know is something that Nick and Martin were very vocal about in the Talking Drupal Slack.
Focused on, yeah.
Yeah, so much so that I think they actually have the 50,000th module. So Drupal's contributed modules recently reached the 50,000 mark. How do you
I didn't know that actually.
Well, there you go. All right, we're breaking news. So
that's awesome.
Yes, there's now a 50,000 project, which is the 50,000.
What does it do?
It's the 50,000th project. I happened to create it right when we hit it. It doesn't do anything.
Wow.
But I was very proud of that. So
I feel like it should shoot glitter or something. I don't know.
Confetti.
Yeah. No, it was
That's amazing, actually. You know, I mean, it's the power of Drupal. I think it's sort of all these modules and the integrations and the capabilities, and as I mentioned, the ability to mix and match these modules and assemble powerful websites. You know, it's what makes Drupal be so successful. So huge milestone.
I think it's also a really strong testament to the passion of the community around Drupal. You know, it's all kinds of different developers over many iterations of Drupal itself. Really contributing to solve common problems and really share those solutions.
I agree. And there's so many amazing things in Contrib too. And it's one of the reasons, again, why I'm excited about the project browser, because, part of our vision is obviously to make it easy to discover and install a module. But the other part of the vision, it's kind of the part that we will focus on later, is to promote some of these amazing things in Contrib. You know, it's a little bit similar to maybe the App Store on your phone. When you go to the App Store, it's not just a directory alphabetical listing of modules. No, like, Apple or Google or whatever, they're trying to push some cool things to you. They're trying to shine a spotlight on some of the best things in the App Store. And we can start doing some things like that. That could be pretty interesting, because there's so many great things happening, and oftentimes people just don't know about it. And I think the module that you highlighted, Martin, in the beginning, the OpenAI modules it's a great example of that. It's actually a really exciting set of modules, but most likely people just don't know about it. So imagine we can feature those modules and make it very easy for everybody to try them out.
But one thing we've been doing here on Talking Drupal since bringing Martin on board weekly is we feature a contributed module every single week. So it could be one that's highly used. It could be one that it's brand new and has 10 installs. So it's a way for us to help the community learn about new things that are coming up.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It's like, obviously we've been involved with Drupal for so long, and sometimes we forget how hard it is for new people to learn all these things and to find their way, which is why a podcast like this one is so valuable.
So at the beginning of the show, we talked about ChatGPT a little bit, and I want to go back to a blog post that you made a few months back, and in there you said the impact of AI on software development is complex topic, and you promised to write about it in the future, and you haven't yet. So
well, the future is, there's
true.
a lot of future ahead of us.
That's right. So so before the robots take over the world, before episode 500, I'm wondering if you could share some of your initial thoughts on that topic of how these AI tools could help software developers, and specifically Drupal developers.
I mean, you can already use it today to write Drupal modules. I tried writing a module, and it kind of worked, and I think when I tried it, it was still using an older data set. So I think it was writing Drupal 8 modules, I think. But still, with the new upgrades or the new backward compatibility, it was pretty good. But yeah, like when I first tried these tools, I had a sense of excitement that I hadn't felt for a while, It really feels to me like this is one of the biggest technology waves ever, and that it will profoundly change content management. It will profoundly change digital marketing. It will profoundly change how we write software. I mean, it already is. I read an article about GitHub's Copilot, and GitHub made a statement basically, that I think it was 64% or something of all the code contributed, committed to GitHub is generated by their Copilot software. It's already more than half of all the new software is.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
That's
crazy.
Scary.
So these things are taking the world by storm, and I mean that feels exciting, And so, of course, as we highlighted, it's great that Drupal already has pretty robust integration. Again, the power of open source, and some of Drupal's competitors are making press releases that they are going to invest in this while we have it, and we don't maybe talk enough about it. Now, all of that, and I did this in my blog post, also, highlighted some of the challenges with this approach too, right? It's not all, all sunshine and roses, so to speak, but there's still legal concerns, misinformation concerns, bias concerns. There's also a lot of things to figure out, but in many ways, that initial feeling that I had reminded me of the early days of the web, or the early days of open source, like this deep excitement. And just like with the web and open source, it came with lots of, kind of concerns too, like in the early days of the web, like there was legal concerns, there was bias concerns, there's misinformation concerns too. And I think over time, we kind of either get comfortable with those things or we sort out solutions for them. And I mean, it never really goes away, obviously, but like, we'll get more advanced about it. And I think, anyway, it's an unstoppable trend. Like
cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, we can't roll this thing back. It's happening, and we have to find a way to take part in it that is aligned with, our values and principles. But we can't ignore it. We have to embrace it. It's really my philosophy. But we have to do it in a well-educated way. We have to be careful where we have to be careful kind of way. So.
So, Dries, you touched on how that's going to, or it's already impacting sort of the field of software development. For people who are sort of coming out of school and entering the development field, what kind of advice would you offer them?
Yeah. First of all, go with open source, I would say. I mean, obviously, I'm a little bit biased, but I do think, if I could, I do think if you want to be the best at something, you have to go with open source. Like anyone can be the best at Drupal because everything is public. You can look at every single line of source code. You can look at 20 years of history and issue queues and tickets and presentations. Like literally, there's almost nothing that stops you from being the best other than maybe time or, but that is in stark contrast with, let's say, you wanted to be the best at Adobe Experience Manager. Like the only way you can be the best is to actually go work for Adobe, which it's like a completely different value proposition, if you will. And a beauty of open source is you can actually become one of the best people in the world at a given technology or solution. So I would start there. And if you go with open source and want to build a career around open source, I would say embrace the community. Don't work in isolation. Like, community is your friend, so to speak, and don't be afraid to ask for help, to engage with the community, to participate in the community. It's incredibly rewarding beyond just using the software. And then maybe to build upon that, I would say, blog about what you do. Get comfortable explaining what you do, how you do things, whether it's to other developers or non-developers. I think for me, when I'm saying all of these things kind of almost like as a reflection on what I've done, obviously open source and embracing the community and blogging. And I think communication is such a key skill. Being able to explain things to other people is such a key skill to develop over time, right? And even if you're an engineer, like I'm an engineer, but for me, learning to express myself better, I'm not saying I'm good at it. I'm saying I got much better at it than what I originally was. I think has helped me a lot. And I think it starts from being part of the community and then not being afraid to kind of write about it or talk about it at conferences. It's a good skill that has served me well, I think. So maybe it's unconventional advice, I don't know, but I really kind of, I see a lot of people in the Drupal community that have taken that path, including the 4 people on this call. And it's really fun,
What I love about what the advice you just gave is that it's not technology specific, because when you hear a lot of, and I've done these searches on YouTube and stuff, is like for newcomers, what is the best programming language? What is the best technology to get into? And that really wasn't what your answer was. No. It was your approach to how you address those technologies. Yeah.
I do think there's a lot of value in learning principles, like architectural patterns, if you will, because they're applicable to many different programming languages or frameworks. I think there's value in those things. But you can learn all those through Drupal, as an example. And a lot of these things then become transferable skills. If you look at how Drupal works or Ruby and Rails works or some of the JavaScript frameworks, there's a lot of, they're very different, but they're also very similar in many ways. And it almost doesn't matter, like technology comes and goes. And
I've always felt that if you can become an expert at one technology, all those skills are completely transferable to something else. Because it's not about the exact language. It's usually about the concepts.
That's right. And so for a lot of people that I speak to, that can be an intimidating idea.
Yeah.
But it can be, but it's actually, it's, if once you know one programming language or two, learning the third becomes relatively easy, I would say. I mean, I've used many different programming languages over the years, and there's always differences, but for the most part, you can kind of pick them up fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think some of the biggest hurdles that you'll run into is, or the things that really need to change is, like, if you're going from scripting language to a compiled language, right? There's different things to think about. If you're going from, I found going from procedural to object oriented,
that's a big change for sure.
Was a big change for me going in the Drupal community as a non-classically trained developer. But one of the great things about being part of the community is that I wasn't the only one going through that learning process at the same time, right?
Right.
So, your advice still stands there, because if you're, participating in a community of an open source project, you can ask those questions, you can get feedback. That's one of the greatest things about, the issue queue and the way that things happen on Drupal.org is that people can give feedback to each other based on, if somebody has more experience somewhere, they can chime in. And, that's a learning opportunity. Even now, 15 years later, I'm still picking up things.
Yeah, I still look at every commit to core, and I will often read sort of the whole discussion.
Yeah.
And it's super insightful. There's so much to learn from just kind of reading issue queue, issues.
It's also one of those things for me, at least, where like, just because you're working with Drupal and you're learning PHP, right? Like Drupal interacts and can intersect with so many other technologies and so many other ways of doing things. Like you're not, like, we all talk about getting off the island, but like that kind of goes into your ability to learn other things as well. Like there are so many other technologies that I know about because throughout my career I've had to interact with them in one way or another, that like you kind of get more exposure, as opposed to like if you were using something that was closed source, right? Where it's like, very, very kind of prescribed in how you interact with other stuff, or maybe you don't even interact with other stuff.
That's right.
Okay, so shifting gears slightly, I have a two-part question. I'd like to know. So you this might not be as far off as I thought it was, because it sounds like you actually do interact with all the core commits still. But what's the last code you wrote that was actually for work? Because I imagine as CTO, you're a little bit further removed from the developer.
I see Martin chuckle. I haven't written much code for Acquia in a long time. I really haven't. I can't even remember. It might be 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's not surprising.
Might be longer ago. Yeah. Honestly, we have such a great team. We have so many products and so many engineers. Like, yeah. I mean, and I've said this before, but like, every morning I wake up and I ask myself, what can I do to have the biggest impact, whether it's on Drupal or on Acquia? And the answer is almost never write code. Right? It literally is never write code.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it saddens me because I love writing code. I really miss it. I really miss writing software.
But that shouldn't be your answer. That shouldn't be
because
the answer at your level.
But I get more driven by optimizing for the impact that I can have than I'm driven by sort of my desire to write software,
So let me reframe the question a little bit. I recently saw somewhere on social media maybe that you upgraded your personal site to Drupal 10, right?
Yesterday.
So the second part of okay. So this is breaking news here, right?
Yeah.
So the second part of Nick's question was for fun, right? I'm wondering, did any part of that upgrade require updating or writing code, or was it as simple as?
No, I update my site myself first of all. Like, I wonder if some people wonder if somebody updates it for me, but no, I do it myself because I want to stay close to the code. But like, I do write software for fun outside of work. Like, for example, my site, I have a bunch of custom modules as an example. Like, I have over 10,000 photos on my site.
Oh, wow.
Most people
I've been on the photos page. I didn't know there were that many, though.
Yeah, there's a lot. But anyway, I have my own photo album module that I wrote. And I have my own way of I created my own filters. I forgot what it's called now. Text formats or filters in Drupal to use photos in my blog posts and that kind of stuff. So I love dabbling with those things, and it's fun to me. And like I'll do that at night or on the weekends or on a long plane ride. I kind of dabble with these things, and it's a good way also for me to stay in touch with what is the Drupal developer experience, what is the upgrade experience. But it's not really the reason why I do it. I do it because it's fun. I've always loved tinkering with my websites, and it's a great tool for me to just relax. It's relaxing. I don't know. It may sound weird, but it is fun and relaxing to me to kind of make it a little bit better.
I was going to say the site headers tool that you have on your website.
Oh yeah, I wrote that one.
Probably a couple of times a year. I find that really handy. So
you know what? Most people may not know about it, but I think it was just at the beginning of COVID, and I think it was one of the Acquians trying to debug like some HTTP headers with a customer. Like, I'm going to just kind of write a quick tool to kind of help people debug HTTP headers, and I added it to my site, and I should, and I actually never wrote a blog post about it, but I should. I looked at it the other day, and it's used like a crazy amount.
Oh, I've used
Like
it.
every second, multiple people use it. Like I thought like maybe 2 or 3 people would use it a day, but it's like it's used like a lot. Somehow people have found their way to this tool.
Has
Anyway,
this
so
been a
should
module
probably-
of the week?
it's actually not open source. I should make it open source too.
Okay, all
But
right.
it's literally like something that I wrote over a couple of evenings, kind of thing. But you should
By the
try it
way,
out. It gives you.
Is it a
some-
module or is it just a
It's
script?
a Drupal module, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's like
Okay.
it's just Dries, my site /header or headers, I forgot. And you can analyze your website's HTTP headers, and it will make some recommendations on how to make
Okay.
your site more scalable or
Oh,
more
great.
secure.
Okay. Yeah.
You're 9 out of
For-
10 right now, by the way.
I
So
am, yeah. So I have some work to
you're
do.
missing a couple of cross version.
How are you doing, Nick?
Edits. I'm going to get there right now. I'm not going to call you out without calling myself out. Don't worry.
For our listeners, we'll put a
I'm
link
5
in
out
the
of
show
10,
notes.
so-
Put it in the show
I guess-
notes, I think.
yeah. No, I got some work to add. I got some work to do. So
No.
I'll get
But
that
anyway,
out.
it's a fun. Like I do like those things. I wrote an iPhone app actually for iOS that tracks my location automatically, because I'm often like, where did we have dinner again? What was the name of that restaurant?
What did you write that in?
In Swift.
Swift.
Ah, okay.
So to my point, it's like it was very easy for me to pick up Swift. I don't know. It's a transferable thing. But yeah, basically, as I go around, it kind of stores my location in a local database. It doesn't go to the cloud or anything. It just stores it on my phone, and it keeps a history of kind of. It has like I call it visit detection. So once I'm like somewhere for a I don't know 15 minutes or so, it will kind of record a visit, and it looks up the name of the place and that kind of stuff, and then I can easily find it back later. Maybe in the next show I'll show it to you. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's a very ugly looking app, only used by me, not available on the App Store, but it's come in handy, and it's been a fun kind of experience to learn about Swift. I have no plans for it. It's just something that I wanted to build for myself.
Cool.
So I guess we see how the founder of Drupal keeps himself grounded in technology. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
So recently Drupal was named a digital public good. Tell us about that, and how do you feel about it?
I feel very excited about it, actually. And I hope others are excited about it too. Let's see. There's actually was a suggestion by somebody in the community, but I think I've written and talked about Drupal being a public good in the past. And public good is kind of an economic term. I won't bore you with the definition, but I came to the realization, I guess, that open source projects, including Drupal, they look an awful lot like public goods, and that we could learn a lot from decades literally of public good research and public good management. Because in open source, as you know, we talk a lot about how to scale open source, how to sustain open source, and these are actually problems that people have studied for years and years, except typically people haven't applied it to software and open source software specifically. And so I've kind of made that connection, and others too, by the way. I'm not saying that I uniquely made that connection, but I've always kind of tried to learn from that, and I've read research papers and books about it. It's super interesting. If you're interested in it, I wrote a very long blog post, and I think it's called Balancing Makers and Takers to Sustain Open Source or something along those lines. And anyway, so all of a sudden, the Digital Public Good Alliance comes along, and they're basically certifying different kinds of digital goods, I guess, whether it's software or data sources or those kinds of things. And if you pass a set of criteria, like public good criteria plus some other criteria. For example, they're affiliated with the United Nations, and they check for sort of the what are they called again? The sort of these big goals that they have set out. I forgot the official term right now. Sorry, but you pass certain privacy kind of tests, if you will, then you can get this recognition, which we got, which is exciting. And it's exciting for a couple of reasons. One, it just creates more visibility and credibility for Drupal, which is great because, again, as I said, it's kind of backed by organizations like United Nations, and it's credible. And the second reason is that I believe that a lot of organizations would prefer to work with official digital public goods. Like if you are in the public sector, in the EDU sector, or any kind of like social impact organization, should be really more inclined to use a digital public good versus one that is not, because by using a digital public good, you're actually contributing back to the world, if you will. You're making those things more sustainable. You're, in addition to using it for your own needs, you're making a larger community, a larger contribution to society. And you know that you're working with things that are in alignment with the Sustainable Global Development Goals. That was, sorry, the word that I was looking for earlier. So it's like a great thing for Drupal. Gives us more visibility, gives us more credibility, and actually one of the things that we're trying to do with the Drupal Association, our nonprofit, is to actually apply for some grants. Something that we've never done. But there are grants out there, and sometimes $1 million grants, like big grants. Then it's like a muscle that we're trying to build at the Drupal Association, and having this recognition might help with that as well. Like imagine you are a large charity organization that's writing grants. This adds to our credibility, I think, as a project, and increases the likelihood of other organizations, because a lot of these organizations, these charities, they're not necessarily technology experts, and so you have to help these grant writers. You have to help them understand what Drupal is and why it's a good thing, and things like being recognized as a digital public good only help us.
So I mean, that must feel very rewarding for you as the founder of Drupal, right? I mean, did you ever think, like all those years ago in your dorm room when you were creating Drupal, that it would, be a global phenomenon, be a digital public good?
No, and it's incredibly rewarding, and I'm incredibly proud of being, Drupal being recognized as a digital public good, and it's obviously the work of thousands of people that contribute to Drupal, and it's very special. It's kind of weird to think about it sometimes. Because when I started Drupal, it was just for myself. It was the software behind my website that I decided to make open source, almost on a whim, and I expected maybe 10 people to ever use it, let alone contribute to it. So it's been very special, the journey. Very surreal often.
Yeah, it's definitely cool looking back. I'm curious, you said it was the software behind your website. Has that website survived the times? Like, is this just, have you continuously upgraded from Drupal 0 alpha to Drupal 10? Or
many people know this story, I think, but it's essentially started out as a small community website at my dorm with other students that were living at the dorm or nearby, and it was like an intranet. It wasn't even publicly accessible on the web. But when I graduated from college and moved out, I moved that community website to the public internet, and that ended up living at a domain name drop.org, drop.org, and that was sort of the original website, or public website, I should say, of my software. And that is what I decided to open source at some point. And I was using Linux, and I was a very small contributor to the Linux kernel at the time. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to copy the GPL license file from my kernel tree into my website and create a tarball and upload that to drop.org. And I spent 30 seconds thinking about the name Drupal. I'm like, oh, what can I use for a name? Droplet. Droplet in Dutch is Drupal. Drupal is kind of a wordplay on the Dutch word for droplet. And, kind of just happened that way. Zero like big plans for it, super low expectations, but slowly but certainly people started to use it, and people started to email a few patches. They would literally send me a patch in an email because we didn't have GitHub and the likes, That just didn't
I'm
exist.
glad we don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's why we ended up, you joke about it, but like at some point we started getting so many patches, and we would email them around at a mailing list. It became just untenable. And somebody said, you know what, we need to create a system for this, and we can build it in Drupal. And so they created project module and the issue queues. And again, this was long before GitLab or GitHub. In many ways, the Drupal community built GitHub before GitHub existed.
Yeah.
And we might have been an inspiration for these solutions, to be quite honest. But we built like a whole kind of GitHub-like experience for ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, the Drupal community has consistently, I should say, innovated in a lot of ways around things. And then, when it comes time to rebuild it, it innovates again. I mean, one of the other huge innovations in the community, I think, as far as, that type of process is the issue credit system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's unique to the Drupal community, I think, and is starting to gain some traction outside. Some people, I think GitLab was exploring it for a while. But yeah, the Drupal community is
they're very interested in it. Yeah, and like obviously once GitHub and GitLab, launched and got some traction, we evaluated moving to these solutions rather than building and maintaining our own. But even there, that was not that easy. Like we had so many features that we built that weren't available in GitLab, as an example, that we had to work. We had to partner with GitLab to bring those features into that software, because we're operating at a scale that they're not used to, right? Like we have 50,000 projects and we have some very unique features about being able to move issues around from one project to another, and like how we do tagging and release management and credit system, to your point, Nick. Like all of these things they didn't have. And some of them they've implemented since because of us. But yeah, it's interesting. And we're, as you know, we're slowly moving to GitLab. It's been a long journey because we have to add those features and work with GitLab to close the gap, so to speak.
Yeah, it's been great. Well, Dries, thank you for joining us again for our next centennial. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, as always.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I feel honored, and I hope to be back one day.
500.
500. Continue the tradition. Sign me up.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
Promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter for show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing Become a Patron. So as we close out, Dries, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, had any questions, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably best email. And you can find my email address on my site, but it's basically Dries, my first name, at my last name, .net. I'll I can spell my last name, but you can probably find it. But first name at lastname.net.
Awesome. And Stephen, how about you?
Just hit me up on Twitter at Stephen Cross with a PH.
How about you, Martin?
On all the social platforms and Drupal Slack, I go by Manclue, and you can also find my blog at manclue.com.
How about you, John?
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi, and you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
And you can find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
If you enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys
Have a
next
good
week.
one, everyone.